The moment the applause started, I tasted blood. Not because anyone hit me, because I bit my tongue hard enough to keep from saying what would have cost me my job. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, the kind of air that makes your lungs feel grainy. I clapped along with everyone else while the kid at the head of the table grinned like he'd lassoed the moon. "Congrats, Chase," I said, forcing the words through a smile that felt like a splinter under my lip. "My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 45, and 5 years of my life had just been slid across polished wood to a 24-year-old with 3 months on the payroll. We were at Redbridge Logistics, a company that kept the guts of the Southwest construction sites moving: steel ribs, turbine spines, machine hearts. I kept those arteries unclogged. I kept the chaos in a jar. "Chase is going to be our new regional operations director," announced Victor Mallory, standing at the head of the table with his shoulders squared like armor. He had the proud, performative air of a man who wanted the applause more than the promoted did. Fresh perspective. Big ideas. Fresh perspective looked like a kid with a soft handshake and a watch that cost more than a month of my mortgage. Chase was Victor's sister's boy. Everyone knew it. We were all pretending not to. I kept my hands folded, kept my face neutral. Inside, something heavy and cold found a place right under my sternum, where ambition used to sit and glow. "Adrian has been invaluable in bringing Chase up to speed," Victor added, as if remembering to toss me a biscuit. "He's been generous with his time. Generous with my time." That's one way to describe 5 years of spotless reviews, 70-hour weeks during the surge years, and my own daughter saying, "Dad, you fell asleep at the dinner table again." "Happy to help," I said. The meeting broke into a spill of handshakes and practiced laughter. The clapping ended. Chairs squeaked back. Someone said there were bagels in the break room, 2 days old. I gathered my notebook and pen slowly, like I was underwater and gravity had turned syrup thick. I wasn't angry. Not in the loud way. What I felt was closer to the clarity of a winter morning, the kind of cold that makes edges razor sharp. "Adrian," Victor said, catching my arm as I reached the door. "Hang back a second." The room emptied. Victor loosened his cobalt tie, like that made him human. "I know this is a surprise," he said in the tone people use for a dog they're about to crate. "But Chase brings energy. Vision." "Sure," I said. "You understand, right? Nothing personal." I studied him. 52. Hairline making a strategic retreat, skin a little puffy around the eyes from too many hotel nights and salt. His own title had been a gift from his father-in-law. He was a relic dressed as a comet. The irony hummed like fluorescent lights. "I understand perfectly." Relief loosened his mouth. "I knew you would. You're a pro, Adrian. That's why you're so valuable. Valuable enough to pave the road with my back. Not valuable enough to be the one walking on it." I went back to my desk under the quiet snowfall of keyboard chatter and phone calls. Outside the window, the yard was a thorny maze of cranes and containers. Inside, I opened my laptop and stared at the Redbridge logo until it stopped being letters and became a crack in a window. I'd started here in April of 2019, 2 weeks after my divorce finalized with a stamp that sounded like the book of my 20s being slammed shut. 12 years at my last company had evaporated under restructuring. At 40, starting over felt like wearing someone else's heavy coat. Redbridge handled industrial distribution across 3 states. It was boring to anyone who didn't understand that boring, consistent, precise, relentless, keeps cities standing. Victor hired me himself. "We're scaling," he'd said, the words sparkling in his mouth. "For the right person, the ladder is tall." I had become the right person. I worked weekends when storms rerouted trucks. I lingered after hours to chase a missing pallet number to the end of the map. I memorized the moods of procurement managers from Santa Fe to Corpus Christi, learned which ones needed jokes, which ones needed silence, which ones needed me to remember their kid's name. My performance reviews read like love letters written by someone who couldn't say the word love. Victor smiled in those meetings and said, "Just a little more patience." I'd always been good at patience. Maybe because patience looks like endurance when you're too tired to tell the difference. My daughter, Mila, is 17. She notices things. She noticed when my eyes went gray. On Sunday mornings, she'd find me at the kitchen table with a cold coffee ring and my laptop glowing blue on my skin. "It's the weekend," she'd say. "Just putting out a fire." I'd say, "Do they pay you extra for arson investigations?" She'd ask, and I had to laugh even when it hurt. 6 months ago, The first crack marched in wearing a grin. My nephew might join us, Victor mentioned casually, like a breeze. Smart kid. Bright in business. Top of his class. You hear, nephew, and you picture the mailroom or shadowing an account manager for a summer, learning to say good morning without swallowing the customer's name. You don't picture an office next door to the regional vice president with a frosted glass title, operations specialist. Chase arrived the way some people arrive at weddings, dressed too well, smiling too big, at the center of photographs he didn't pose for. He's going to learn how we do things, Victor said to our team, the way nobles used to present a squire. Chase learned by sitting in on my vendor calls, taking notes on a tablet that probably cost more than my car payment, asking questions that told me he didn't know how freight classes work. He was polite, eager, charming in the way of people who have never had to worry about rent. I trained him because that's what you do, until the moment you realize training is the act of carving your name onto a bullet. 3 weeks before today, I learned exactly how the gun would be fired. It was a Wednesday late enough that the hallways smelled like lemon cleaner and lonely decisions. I stayed to finish quarterly reports because numbers settle easier when the building empties out and the copy machine is the only thing breathing. On the way to the break room for a bad cup of caffeine, I passed Victor's office and heard a deeper voice. The door was cracked. Doors always are when they should be closed. The board's going to ask questions, the voice said. It was Malcolm Shaw, a corporate VP with a voice like a piano lid closing. Chase has only been here 60 days. You said Adrian was ready, Malcolm added, and I felt myself pause like a deer at the edge of a field. Adrian's solid, Victor said, a patriarch pronouncing a farmhand sturdy. But Chase is family. He's got the degree. The board eats that up. And Adrian's experience? Malcolm said. He didn't sound like he cared, but he said the words like he was checking a box. Victor laughed soft. Not unkind. That was the worst part. Adrian's reliable. He'll keep the trains moving, make good money, and he won't kick up a fuss. We give Chase the title, Adrian props him up. Everybody wins. Everybody. I stood in the quiet hallway with the vending machine humming behind me and realized for the first time that patience can be a kind of self-betrayal. I went back to my desk and saved my spreadsheet, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I left without saying good night to anyone. That evening, the house was too quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with no laptop and felt my hands twitch for it. In the dark window above the sink, my reflection looked older than 45. My ex-wife's last clean shot, years old, floated back. You let people walk over you, Adrian. You call it being decent. Sometimes it's just you lying down. I didn't sleep. I didn't rage. I just ran through the math, mortgage, child support, college savings, the timing of invoices, the timing of courage, and the numbers somehow lined up with a clarity that scared me. The next morning, I went to work like I always did, but I sharpened my listening. I watched how often people looked to Chase now in meetings, and how often Chase's eyes cut to mine. I noticed which managers tilted toward him in case loyalty could be trained like a dog. I watched Victor perform confidence, and I watched it tire him out by 3 in the afternoon. 3 weeks later, under the applause and congratulatory pats that meant nothing, something inside me stepped off the hamster wheel. I went back to my desk and wrote my resignation letter. I wrote it cleanly, like a good memo. I stated facts. I gave 2 weeks. I thanked the company for the opportunity. I didn't apologize. I printed it on heavier paper than necessary because the weight felt right in my hands. At 4:30 p.m., I knocked on Victor's door. He was fresh from touring the yard with Chase, showing him his kingdom like a proud landlord. This is my notice, I said, placing the envelope on his desk and watching confusion blossom into irritation and then into the kind of fear that only surfaces when someone realizes the script has changed and no one told him. Is this a joke? He said. No. You're quitting because… What? Because you didn't get the promotion. I didn't answer that. He needed the silence more than I needed to fill it. Victor stood up, paced behind his desk, came to the front like he might block the door. Let's be reasonable. Don't throw away 5 years over pride. I'm not throwing anything away. What about your daughter? Your responsibilities? There it was, the rope he thought was wrapped around my neck. I'll manage. You realize how this looks? His voice sharpened like a paper cut. It's unprofessional. It's childish. Companies don't hire people who throw tantrums when they're disappointed. I let him finish sculpting the story he needed to tell himself. When he was done, I said. That's your opinion. He tried again. No reference from me, Adrian. You understand? You're walking out on us. Noted, I said. Victor blinked, recalculating. You'll at least train Chase on the critical accounts. I'll finish my 2 weeks. I'll document everything. You think he needs your documentation? Victor said, wounded pride leaking around the edges. You think he can't? He'll need it, I said gently. He would. Not because he was incapable of learning, but because the fire he was standing in would melt a lot of good intentions. The following Monday, I found Chase in early, tie crooked, eyes dark with the kind of exhaustion people get when the masks stop fitting. He had spreadsheets open on 3 monitors like a gambler trying to watch too many tables. He looked relieved when I stepped into the doorway. Thank God, he said. Adrian, I mean. Sorry, I've been here since 6. Halcyon Foundry is about to walk. Their procurement director says the titanium brackets are late, and they've got a line shut down. If we don't reroute something by noon, they'll cancel the quarter. Halcyon was our biggest. A steady $2 million per year, and the kind of influence that could make other clients reconsider just by raising an eyebrow. For 4 years, I had managed Halcyon personally. I knew where their bottlenecks were and which of their engineers needed to be copied on which emails to keep panic from breeding. What supplier? I asked. Tucson. No, maybe Gallup? The emails are. He gestured helplessly at an avalanche of threads that had already begun to bury him. I went through it calmly, pointing, explaining, rerouting, calling. I walked him through the backup sources I'd verified in advance months ago, because I never assumed just one bridge would always be passable. We patched the leak before noon. We kept Halcyon's line from choking on its own schedule. This is insane, he said afterward, staring at the maps like they might rearrange themselves into a simpler shape if he stared long enough. How do you keep it all in your head? I don't, I said. I build systems that remember for me, and I write everything down like I'm not going to be here tomorrow. He nodded, throat working. Could I see how you structure it? Your folders and trackers and all of it? I'm documenting it, I said, but I'll walk you through the core. He looked grateful, like a kid who just realized the cheat sheet he's been given is actually a syllabus. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Not internal, clients. Cordell Mining wanted to confirm I was still their point of contact for the foreseeable. Tilson Turbine asked if the leadership change would affect their expedited shipments. A woman from Meridian Dynamics, a competitor I'd deflected twice in the past year, sent a text that said simply, "If you're ever ready to talk, I'm still ready to listen. Serena." I turned the phone face down and kept working because the house wasn't on fire anymore, but it still smelled like smoke. At lunch, I called Halcyon's procurement director, Cameron Price, to reassure him. You'll have me this week, I said. After that, Chase Mallory will be your main contact. Mallory as in. Cameron started, and then he sighed like a man who's had a long day and just found out it's going to be longer. I thought he was a new hire. He called me this morning to ask what a carrier liability cap is. He's learning, I said carefully. I don't pay you to train your management, Cameron said. I pay for parts to show up when they're supposed to. If Redbridge can't do that, I'll find someone who can. The conversation repeated itself 3 more times that afternoon with 3 other major accounts. The only difference was the metaphors they used for fire. Tuesday morning, Victor called me into his office. He had the look of a man whose belt is 1 notch tighter than yesterday. I've been thinking, he said, which was not a thing that made me hopeful. Maybe we can create a spot for you. Associate Operations Director. You'd handle technical execution. Chase would set vision, strategy, outward-facing stuff. You'd be a team. A team where I do the job, and he spreads the credit, I said mildly. Victor didn't flinch. You get a title, a path. We can talk compensation in the fall. I imagined my future measured in talks and falls that never arrived. I appreciate it, I said, but I'll stick to my notice. You will regret this, Victor said. He didn't snarl it or spit it. He said it like a weather report. I suppose for him it was. On Wednesday, I took a lunch I hadn't taken in months and met Serena Park from Meridian at a diner that still served coffee in heavy mugs and called everyone Han. Serena was early 40s, sharp-eyed in a way that made you think of bright winter stars. She'd run operations for 2 regions before moving into an executive role. People trusted her because she never pretended not to know what she knew. I heard through the grapevine, Serena said, not bothering to pretend she didn't know everything. Notice given, Last Friday. We've wanted you for 2 years, she said, sliding a folder across the table with numbers crisp enough to smell like ink. Regional Operations Director. Salary that respects what you've been doing for the last 5 years, not the title they denied you. Sign on to offset the risk you're taking. Budget authority without a maze every time you need a new forklift motor. We want your systems. And we want your reputation. You didn't sign a non-compete. No. Clients are adults, she said. If they choose to follow you because you answer the phone at midnight, that's not theft. That's gravity. I thought of Victor saying the word childish like a gavel. I thought of Mila's college fund and the smile she hadn't worn in months when she saw me at the kitchen table on a Friday night without a work laptop in my lap. I'll finish my 2 weeks, I said. Then I'll give you my answer. We can wait 12 days, Serena said. We can't wait 12 months. On Friday, Victor called me in again. Chase sat in the corner like a substitute teacher who had been forced to send half the class to the principal. I'm hearing you're interviewing with competitors, Victor said without warming up. I'm exploring options. While still employed. While you're supposedly training Chase. That's a conflict. That's disloyal. It's legal, I said. It's disloyal, he repeated, as if the echo itself was an argument. And if you take our client relationships with you, it's theft. My relationships are relationships, I said. They're not inventory. They belong to Redbridge. They belong to the people who built them, I said. Including me. Victor's face went red in that particular way that always makes me worry about blood pressure. We will sew the skin off your back, he said. Chase flinched. You can do what you think you have to do, I said, standing. I'll do what I have to. Adrian, Chase said quietly as I turned to go. If I have questions, is it okay if I ask you? I know my uncle. Ask, I said. Ask while I'm here. I want you to succeed. It was true. If a kid is handed a grenade, you don't teach him a lesson by letting it go off. I spent my final week as a cartographer of chaos, leaving a map behind for someone else to walk. I wrote playbooks with screenshots and plain words. I included vendor quirks, like the supplier in Tucumcari who returns calls faster if you mention the Friday night football score. I didn't do it for Victor. I did it for the line managers whose hands shook when the crane stalled an hour before a delivery window. On my last day, I boxed a coffee mug and a photograph of Mila with cake on her nose at age 5, carried them out past the front desk, and handed my badge to security. Victor intercepted me at the door like a final exam. This isn't over, he said. It is for me. I answered, and sunlight hit me like applause when the doors opened. 2 weeks later, I started at Meridian Dynamics. The first thing Serena said, after the paperwork and the key card and the HR video about eyewash stations, was, I am not Victor. You don't have to tell me that, I said. I know, she replied. I wanted to say it anyway. Meridian ran leaner, faster, less enamored with acronyms made up in meetings. They had a mess in the West region, backlogs, an ERP migration that someone had tried to duct tape, a yard that looked organized from above and like regret from ground level. They wanted me to fix it. They gave me the team and budget to try. I built within my first week the documentation structure I always wanted, but could never justify at Redbridge. I mapped our supplier reliability with darts of data and added the human notes. Call Nadia early. Don't promise Frank anything unless it's already on the truck. I built escalation paths that involved fewer people and more responsibility. I brought 3 dispatchers with me from Redbridge, people who called me the morning I left to say, if you jump, we're not staying on the sinking ship for the cocktail hour. I didn't poach. I answered when good people called asking, is there room? There was. Cameron at Halcyon called me in my 3rd week. I'm not supposed to be doing this, he said without preamble. But can Meridian handle the brackets for Q3? Redbridge promised, and then, I don't know, someone promised a promise. We can do it, I said, but I won't sign a number I can't make real. Real is all I want, Cameron said. And then he was quiet for a second in a way that felt like gratitude finally unclenching. You know we might move more than the brackets. I know, I said, and I did, not with glee, but with the sober feeling of gravity that Serena had named in the diner. I didn't call around bragging. I worked. I made good on the spreadsheets I had drawn in my head at 3 in the morning, year after year. I went home before 9 p.m. Often enough that Mila asked whether I'd been fired, and when I laughed she laughed with me, and that's how I knew my house was a house again. Redbridge didn't implode in a single day. It would have made for a better story if it had. Collapse is a slow thing, like termites in a beam. You don't notice until the porch sags, and by then the rot is in the ribs. News trickled to me the way weather does. Halcyon moved half their business by the end of the quarter. Cordell Mining split their orders. Tilson Turbine stayed, but they put penalty teeth into the contract sharp enough to draw blood. Good people started leaving. Dispatchers, schedulers, a quietly brilliant analyst named Priya who had been told for 2 years to hold her horses while the horses starved. 6 months after I left, Serena slid a glossy trade magazine onto my desk the way a friend slides you a joke you'll appreciate. Red Bridge to Nowhere? The headline said. Subhead: Southwest Division hemorrhages clients amid nepotism storm. The article laid out the numbers without pity. 4 major accounts gone in 5 months. Revenue down 58%. Board investigating leadership practices. A paragraph with quotes from unnamed sources who were obviously named Priya. Victor was terminated without cause, the way they write it to keep the lawyers calm. Chase resigned to pursue further education. After 3 months in the big chair, and another 3 in the oversized jacket of regret. The article included one cruel little sentence that I knew was true. According to internal documents reviewed by the Journal, there was no written succession plan for the regional role beyond an email thread titled Family. Clients, Serena said, leaning in my doorway. 3 already called, I said, because I had a phone log to prove it. They asked if Meridian can pick up the slack. We can, she said. We will, I said. That week, we onboarded Cordell fully and scheduled a phased plan for Tilson that gave them a lifeline without strangling us. I brought in a tired, brilliant driver manager from Redbridge who knew every way station officer in a 2-state radius by first name and candy preference. We replaced luck with scheduling, replaced hope the truck makes it with sensors and accountability. When I walked through the yard at sunrise, I didn't feel like a man apologizing for tomorrow. I felt like a builder, finally standing in the frame. A year after I left Redbridge, business took me through Tucson. Meridian had a site visit in the morning, and I had the evening to myself in a town that always smells like dust and rain, or having a conversation about who gets to go first. I stopped at a diner near the airport where the waitress calls you sweetheart, without meaning anything but kindness. In the corner booth sat a familiar face, older by 2 winters, a textbook open in front of him, and a pen in his hand for what looked like the first honest time. Chase, I said. He looked up, blinking like he'd been underwater, and someone opened a door. He smiled. No flash, no teeth, just a human smile. Adrian, what are you doing here? Business, I said. Mind if I sit? He gestured toward the opposite seat. The book on the table was Supply Chain Strategy and Risk. The pages were creased, notes in the margins. Highlighter had bled like a small, well-meaning wound across a paragraph about supplier diversification. Back in school, I asked. Masters, he said. Arizona State. Logistics and Operations. I figured it was time to actually learn the thing I tried to wear like a jacket. That's smart. Smart would have been doing it before, he said, and almost laughed at himself. I wanted to thank you. For what? For not letting me drown when you could have held my head under. He fiddled with his pen cap. You could have left me a mess. You didn't. You were thrown into an impossible situation, I said. Nepotism is a cage, even when the bars look like favors. My uncle still blames you for everything, he said, looking down. Says you sabotaged the company by leaving and stealing his clients. What do you think? I asked. Chase looked up and met my eyes for a long moment. I think I didn't belong in that chair. And I think you did. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't awkward, it was honest. He asked about Meridian. I told him the truth, not a sales pitch, just the facts and the things we still struggled with. He asked about how to build a backup supplier tree that doesn't collapse the first time the wind changes. I sketched a simple version on a napkin and slid it across the table. He grinned. You still draw like a person who is extremely good at spreadsheets. Best compliment I've had all week. I paid for both our meals before I left, not because I had to, but because leaving someone with a good taste in their mouth felt like the opposite of the day I left Redbridge. On the way out, he said, Adrian? Yeah. You didn't deserve what happened to you. Neither did you, I said. He looked past me at some point in the middle distance where all our decisions turn into old photographs, and he nodded. Another 6 months cloaked itself in calendar pages. I heard while driving between sites that Victor had filed for bankruptcy after losing a wrongful termination suit he'd foolishly pursued against Redbridge's board. He'd insisted he'd been wronged. The court papers said otherwise. A mutual acquaintance told me he'd moved to a condo near the lake and was starting something called a growth consultancy, which I hope taught him what growth isn't. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Chase graduated with honors. He took an entry-level job at a logistics firm in Phoenix that made its new hires pull routes before they were allowed to touch a spreadsheet, and he learned to listen to drivers who had been alive longer than he had. He got his first promotion after he rerouted a storm-struck convoy in a way that saved a hospital's backup generator delivery by 20 minutes. He called me one night a year later to tell me that story. I kept thinking, write it down like you won't be there tomorrow, he said. I told him that sounded like a good whisper to keep in your pocket. The revenge, if that's what you still want to call it, didn't arrive like a courtroom speech or a door slammed in someone's face. It came like spring in a dry state, slow and steady, green in the ditch first, then crawling up the banks. It came as the absence of 2 a.m. dread. It came as Mila texting me TikToks of dogs wearing bow ties and me being awake to watch them. It came as Selena from Meridian's finance team stopping by my office one afternoon only to say, "You changed the way the yard sounds," and me hearing it. The difference between chaos and a plan. Not everything turned to gold. We lost a bid we should have won because I priced the risk wrong. A truck rolled a tire on a bad day, and a good man sprained an ankle, and I had to look him in the eye and say, "It's my responsibility," and mean it. But my team knew I'd hold the line on promises, and our clients learned that yes means yes and no means no, and that kind of reputation spreads like heat in iron. A year and a half after I left, Meridian hosted a vendor summit at a repurposed machine shop in Austin. Strings of lights, long tables, laughter that sounded like something being released. Cameron from Halcyon stood up to give a toast, and I braced for some textbook words about synergy. Instead, he said, "To the people who pick up the phone when we're bleeding." Everyone laughed. Then he added, "To the ones who write it down as if they won't be there tomorrow." I shot Serena a look and she smirked. After the dinner, outside in the warm air that smelled like cedar and hot metal, Serena asked, "Do you ever think about Victor?" "Sometimes," I said. "Then I go home." "What about Chase?" "I think about him," I said. "He'll be all right. He learned the thing his uncle never did. Which is, that respect doesn't trickle down. It's built from the ground up. And advancement isn't inherited. It's earned." She nodded, then tilted her head at me. "You know," she said lightly, "for someone who claims he doesn't care about revenge, you're very good at it." "I didn't revenge him," I said. "I replaced him." "What's the difference?" "One of them keeps me up at night," I said. "The other lets me sleep." On a Saturday afternoon the following spring, I took Mila to a used bookstore and watched her find a first edition of a fantasy series she'd loved when she was 9. She held it like it was alive. We ate tacos from a place that only accepts cash and survived anyway. On the drive home, she said, "You smile more. You telling me I was unbearable for 2 years?" "No," she said, laughter a soft ribbon in her voice. "You were just somewhere else. Like you were always thinking about a problem that would still be there whether you worried or not. And now you're here." That night, after she went to a friend's house and I wiped the counters clean of guacamole, I stood by the kitchen window while the neighborhood inhaled. Streetlights flickered on. A dog barked twice and then thought better of it. I thought of the conference room, the stale coffee, the applause that had grated like a belt on a slipping pulley. I thought of Victor's certainty that I needed him more than he needed me. I thought of Chase, face pale in the glare of 3 monitors. Some stories end with a villain dragged from a throne. Mine ends with me building a different house. In the new one, the window's open. In the new one, we keep records that would teach a stranger how to feed the dog, water the plants, close the door gently so it doesn't rattle the picture frames. In the new one, my daughter sits at the table doing calculus and looks up to say, "I like this song," and I know the title and I don't say, "1 second," because I am already there. Years from now, someone will ask me about Redbridge. I will tell them the truth without bitterness, because bitterness is a tax you pay only to yourself. I'll tell them I learned how to be patient until I learned that patience had become my excuse. I'll tell them that walking away isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes it's the first step of standing up. If they press me, if they want the bite and the drama, the fire and the ruin, I'll let them have one small, sharp thing. The taste of victory is not sweet. It's clean. It's the taste of water after you've been thirsty for too long. It's the sound of a phone ringing and you picking it up because you wanna, not because you're afraid not to. And if they ask about revenge, I'll say this. Sometimes, the best revenge is building something better and leaving the doors open. So when the people who underestimated you finally come knocking, you can decide, without anger and without fear, whether to let them in. The morning after the vendor summit, I opened my inbox to a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Recommendation request." Inside was a note from Chase. He wrote that an internal promotion had opened at his company, and they'd asked him to provide references who could speak to his growth under pressure and to his willingness to learn. I sat there for a long minute with the cursor blinking. Then I wrote back a page and a half about a kid who had been handed a throne and chose, later, to earn a seat at the table instead. I wrote about asking questions you don't want the answers to and asking anyway. I sent it with my name under it. An hour later, Serena poked her head into my office. "You look like you just did something generous you don't want credit for." "Maybe," I said. "Good," she replied. "That looks better on you than rage ever did." That afternoon, I walked the yard, letting the sun freckle my forearms. Engines idled, then quieted. A driver shouted to another about a score from last night's game. A forklift beeped, reversed, beeped again. The sound in my bones was the sound of a machine running well because someone cared to keep it oiled. I thought of all the hands that made that possible, the ones who never get headlines, only calluses. I pulled out my phone and texted Mila. "Dinner? Your choice." She replied with 3 knife and fork emojis and the name of a place that served pizza cut in squares instead of triangles. We ate too much and brought home a box we'd forget in the fridge. She told me about a physics lab in which a marble didn't go where it was supposed to, and I told her that's how most of life works, and sometimes the marble knows something the track doesn't. She rolled her eyes in a way that carried more affection than scorn. Later that night, I stood on the back step and listened to cicadas roll their static over the neighborhood like a soft storm. Somewhere, in a different life, a man named Victor reread an email from a lawyer and told himself a story where he was the hero. Somewhere else, Chase fell asleep with a book on his chest and a future he'd decided to earn. In my house, there was only quiet, and in it, for the first time in years, I could hear myself think without checking the time. When people ask what I built after I left Redbridge, I tell them the truth. A division that stopped bleeding, a team that answers one another's calls, a set of systems anyone can follow on their worst day. A life where my daughter knows I will close my laptop when she asks me to look at the sky because it looks like a bruise and she wants to know if sunsets can hurt. They can, but they also heal. Months later, I got a postcard from Phoenix. On the front, a downtown skyline at dusk. On the back, in careful handwriting, got the promotion. You were right about backup suppliers and Friday night football scores. Dinner on me next time. See, I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Sometimes my eyes snagged on it while spreadsheets lined themselves into meaning, and I felt that clean, water-cold feeling again, the one that tastes nothing like victory speeches and everything like being able to breathe. That's the whole story. Not the loudest revenge, perhaps. Not the kind that makes for a movie. But it's the kind that lets you sleep, and waking without dread is a kind of triumph no applause can counterfeit. If you ever find yourself clapping for someone else's coronation while your mouth fills with the taste of iron, remember this. Crowns given are heavy in the wrong places. The ones you make yourself balance better. And when they ask you to kneel so they can set theirs on your head, you can always stand, hand back the velvet, and build something that fits.